2003, Saddam Hussein was captured, the man who ruled the country with an iron fist, and then he was executed by the new Iraqi government. But despite what most people believe, taking out Saddam wasn't the problem, taking out his political party was. In June 2003, the US-led Coalition Provisional Authority of Iraq banned the Ba'ath Party and all its members. This was the most ill-conceived decision in the whole invasion of Iraq affair, as it completely upset the fragile balance of power that existed in the Middle East. My name is Shirvan, and welcome to Caspian Report. With this ban, every public sector employee who was affiliated with the Ba'ath Party was removed from position and was banned from any future employment in the public sector. But in a totalitarian state as Saddam's Iraq, being a member of the Ba'ath Party was more a necessity than a choice. It's like saying that the Soviet Communist Party and all its members should have been banned from the public sector when the USSR collapsed. So what happened in Iraq was that thousands of experienced people were blocked from participating in the new government, people such as doctors, professors, bureaucrats, etc. But perhaps the most important change was that the ban effectively dismantled the Iraqi military and security apparatus, because everyone there was a member of the Ba'ath Party. Back then, the US thought that this was necessary to create a new Iraqi government from scratch. But what it really did was create a void of power, a void that was quickly filled by Iraq's Shia Muslim majority with the strong support and coordination from neighboring Iran. So what really happened was that the US attacked and occupied Iraq, passed the legislation, and then immediately lost the country from right under its nose to Iran. We discussed the rise of Iranian geopolitics and more in a previous Caspian report. For the local Sunni Arabs, it meant that they lost their country to the Shiites, the same people which the Sunnis oppressed for decades during the rule of Saddam. And now that the Shia Arabs were in control, it was their turn for vengeance. So in the last decade, the new Shiite government of Iraq, under the leadership of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, consolidated its power and excluded the Sunnis from the decision-making process. The situation only worsened with the withdrawal of American troops in 2011. Al-Maliki's government started targeting Sunni politicians and public figures. In short, the new Iraqi government was turning into an autocracy. The Sunni Arab population felt oppressed and urgently needed a change. That change came in the form of the Arab Spring and the crisis in neighboring Syria. Back in 2011, when most people were still hoping for the Arab world to turn to democracy and liberalism, at Caspian Report we discussed the rise of jihadists and extremist organizations and movements that would ultimately hijack the revolutions. It takes a while for humans to come to terms with reality, but it eventually did. You see, the longer a rebellion lasts, the more extreme it gets over time. So what started out as peaceful demonstrations in Syria turned to violence when the opposition received political support from the US and its regional Sunni allies. It should be noted that at the time, most of the American analysts believed that al-Assad's government would be overthrown, much like Libya's Gaddafi. So this was a geopolitical gamble that the US, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and other allies were willing to take. It turned out this was yet another poorly planned decision. Al-Assad wasn't overthrown, instead the country turned to civil war. So the US and its allies covertly and to a certain degree overtly supplied the Syrian opposition with military equipment. The mainstream media noted that these were moderate rebels, but as we mentioned earlier, the longer a rebellion lasts, the more extreme it gets over time. So what started out as moderate rebels turned into extremist rebels, and this eventually paved the way for extremist groups. What you have to understand is extremist organizations are born in chaos and they thrive in chaos, whilst stability is their death. The leader of the Al-Qaeda affiliated Islamic State of Iraq, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, saw an opportunity to intermingle the Syrian civil war and the boiling pot that was the Sunni region of Iraq. So he devised a plan to exploit the Sunni-Shia animosity. Al-Baghdadi's plan involved expanding his operations into Syria. So in 2011, he sent one of his most experienced commanders, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, to establish a new sub-Al-Qaeda organization in Syria. Al-Julani, being Syrian himself, quickly expanded his Syrian-based group within a short time. A year later, this organization became better known as the Al-Nusra Front, and it was considered the most effective rebel force in Syria. But back in Iraq, al-Baghdadi still needed to intermingle the Syrian civil war with the Sunni-Shia split in Iraq. So in April 2013, al-Baghdadi announced that the al-Nusra Front, which he helped to establish, was now part of his domain under the name Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS for short. Obviously, the leader of the al-Nusra Front, al-Julani, wasn't too happy with this and thus fiercely denied this merging. Al-Julani wanted Syria as his own territory, so al-Baghdadi and al-Julani appealed to Al-Qaeda's leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and al-Zawahiri stated that ISIS should be abolished and that al-Baghdadi should be confined to Iraq, whereas Syria would be the domain of al-Julani. It's like a feudal system in which the king placed the rival lords against each other. So what happened next was that al-Baghdadi dismissed al-Zawahiri's ruling and instead moved to attack the al-Nusra Front from the back whilst the al-Nusra Front was engaging al-Assad's forces. And it worked. Al-Baghdadi took control over al-Julani's HQ in Syria and subsequently took over 80% of al-Julani's foreign fighters. Al-Zawahiri was furious and broke off relations with al-Baghdadi, and al-Julani declared his own emirate domain in Syria. So the breakoff between ISIS and Al-Qaeda is a political schism within Al-Qaeda. It has nothing to do with ISIS being too extreme or whatsoever. Anyway, while al-Baghdadi was plotting against his former commander al-Julani, he was also increasing attacks on civilians in Iraq. These attacks focused on both Shia and Sunni civilians, and as we mentioned earlier, there was already serious friction between these two groups. All ISIS had to do was escalate the situation and drive Iraq towards a new civil war. We talked about the activities of ISIS in Iraq in a previous report back in September 2013. The whole point of the civil war was to create chaos, and from chaos rises the extremist factions, and once the civil war ignited, ISIS would rise as the dominant faction, as the glorious defenders of Sunni Islam. ISIS achieved exactly what it wanted, and that is where we are today. Think of this as a jihadist version of Hitler's Reichstag fire. By manipulating the Sunni-Shia split of the Iraqi society, ISIS was able to rapidly expand throughout the Sunni Arab region of Iraq. Again, this was because the Sunni Arab population did not resist ISIS, but instead welcomed them as a counterbalance to the Shiite rulers of the country. And it's also the reason why the Iraqi military forces abandoned their outposts and positions, because the army would be fighting not just ISIS, but the entire Sunni Arab population. All of this means that ISIS is not the real problem. You can destroy ISIS, but if you don't solve the core problem, another extremist militant faction will rise and replace what was destroyed. The relations or lack of relations between the Sunni and Shiite communities, that is the core problem, and that is where the solution lies. In the next Caspian report, we will take a look at the feasibility of Washington's anti-ISIS coalition. We will also discuss the exact purpose behind the airstrikes, and we will talk about more pragmatic solutions to solve the threat posed by ISIS. For now, thanks for watching Caspian Report. My name is Shirvan, and I hope to see you in the next report. Sağ ol.